I'm professional investigator Justin Yentes. Here we cut through the noise, dig deep, and uncover what others overlook. If you're ready to roll up your sleeves and get to the bottom of the story, you've come to the right place. Welcome to Truth Be Found. Let's get to work. Welcome back to Truth Be Found. Today, we're going to continue on with part 2 of the conversation on the death penalty with Mr. Dale Baish. Dale, I want to go into a bit of a technical and somewhat political area here. And, honestly, on this show, we've tried to stay as apolitical as possible because I feel that, justice should be blind and regardless of who's in power, the wheels of justice should turn the same. In December of 24, former President Biden commuted the sentences of 37 men on federal death row in Terre Haute. And I remember before this happened, there were emails going around in the defense community, and many were looking at how to reach out to the Biden administration to ask him to commute these sentences because there was a fear. Sounded like there was a fear that the incoming administration would speed up the process and execute federal inmates while their cases still had a lot of claims to pursue. Could you explain what this move from President Biden did? Like, what was the net effect of that order that he made?
Well, there were 40 people who were on federal death row, and President Biden commuted 37 of the sentences to life without parole.
Is that a get out of jail free card?
No, it means that the person is incarcerated for the rest of their life.
Okay.
Life without parole means life without parole. You're dying
in prison.
You die in prison. And there was some backlash to that, but that was a 2-year effort by the Biden administration where they reached out to all of the victim family members. They reached out to the U.S. attorneys. So this wasn't some off-the-cuff decision that was made.
Mm-hmm. That's good to know. I'll tell you, I had a conversation with a standard of care expert, Tanya Peterson, who you probably know.
Yes.
And she had called to congratulate me because one of my defendants was on federal death row and had his sentence commuted, and she had heard about it and said congratulations. And it initially really bothered me because I felt like our work was being politicized and used in a way that was unfair to the families and unfair to the Constitution and everything that we represent, to take what we're doing and use it as a political chit. What is your perspective on that?
Well, as I said at the beginning, the death penalty is all about politics. So politics come into play at just about every decision point in a case. And let's look what happened after those commutations. Immediately, you had President Trump issue an executive order saying, those prisoners should be kept in the most harsh conditions, and also encouraged state prosecutors to seek the death penalty under state law in each of those cases.
There's an Arizona case where that came into play, or that is coming into play. There's one in Florida and elsewhere that it looks like the strategy is to use the states to undermine this commutation of sentences. And first of all, before we get into that, these men that were on death row, so there were 37 that had their sentences commuted. They were in the process of being moved to ADX, which is the Supermax facility in Florence, Colorado, where, and I assume you've been there. I don't know if you've ever done interviews there. you walk up and they've got your picture. They know who you are before you get there. They walk you through a tunnel underground to sit in a glass room. It's the closest thing to, the Hannibal Lecter scene that I've ever experienced. And so essentially, these 37 were being moved from federal death row in Terre Haute to a hole in the middle of the mountains of Colorado where they would be until they died. So now they're being pulled out of that to be sent to the States to have their cases relitigated. And I think most of our listeners and viewers understand that in the United States, there exists a theory called double jeopardy, and that you can't be charged twice for the same crime. Could you explain how this squares with the double jeopardy issue?
Well, there's also a doctrine known as the dual sovereignty doctrine, and it goes back to 1847, and what the Supreme Court held that a crime under one sovereign's law is not the same offense as a crime under another sovereign's law. And this principle was upheld in 2019 by the Supreme Court in Gamble versus United States. And double jeopardy protects jeopardy for the same offense, not for the same conduct or actions. And to me, that's hair splitting. But that's been the law since 1847.
Well before our time.
Yes.
And I'll say one of my earliest federal cases was it was a sex trafficking case, sex trafficking through force, fraud, or coercion, and the defendant had state charges and federal charges for the same act, and I'd been a defense investigator for all of 10 minutes, and so I didn't have a lot of understanding, but it very much confused me how someone could have multiple charges in multiple jurisdictions when they did one act. What has been a question on my mind with the states attempting to recharge these 37, and maybe we should give some backstory here. I was out doing some interviews on a federal case and spoke with a crime victim in one of these cases. And she had been contacted by the Department of Justice, by Pam Bondi's office, and invited to go to DC a couple of months ago and have a meeting with them. And she showed me the letter that she'd received from the DOJ, and it said it was a listening session where they were going to listen to the concerns of the victims from this unlawful commutation. But then she also received a phone call, which obviously was not in writing, where she was told that the cases were being looked at for state prosecution. And so there was a big discrepancy as to what was put down in paper and in print and via email and what was said on the phone. And I was somewhat dubious of hanging my hat on that until after the meeting occurred, and then it broke in the news that this had happened. But these victim families were brought to Washington, D.C. to meet with the DOJ and essentially pitch the idea of re-prosecuting their cases. How do you feel the local municipalities, is this coming from the locals deciding to prosecute these cases, or is this coming from, if you know, from the feds asking the local prosecutors to move on them?
I think it's a little of both. And what you described, what the Justice Department is doing by calling these victims in having a meeting with them and sending them letters and having phone calls, is they're re-traumatizing the victims. I know that the Biden administration reached out to all the victims and spoke to them, and they get the decision that life without parole is what's going to be imposed, and then all of a sudden that changes. So the victims are going to be re-traumatized during this process. I think some states are sort of following the lead of the Trump administration. You have Louisiana, which is going to seek death in one of these cases.
Tom Sanders?
Yes. Yeah. And I think Florida, they're considering two cases. But you also have Missouri, where the St. Louis County prosecutor said no. The citizens of St. Louis County are not going to be served by us seeking the death penalty in this case. The guy's going to be locked up for the rest of his life. And something similar happened in a Texas case. So
that surprises me coming out of Texas.
Yeah, but it depends on how much pressure the Justice Department puts on these local prosecutors, and we saw through the executive order that was issued on January 20th that the Trump administration wants to make the death penalty great again. So I think some prosecutors are responding to that.
Okay. Now, if you've got a case, like the Tom Sanders case, that I believe it had 2 homicides, one in Louisiana, one in Yavapai County. Assuming, so this is a guy, Sanders, that will never or would never step foot in Arizona again. What benefit does Yavapai County have in seeking the death penalty for him when he would, if left alone, die in a hole in Florence, Colorado?
To me, there's no benefit in doing that. I guess
I'm asking the wrong person for that argument.
but let's assume that Yavapai County decides to move forward with the prosecution. It's going to be very, very costly. It's going to be years before that case goes to trial. We spent some time talking about the appellate, post-conviction, and federal habeas process. The case would have to go through all of that. And we're looking at the death sentence being carried out maybe 30 years from now. I don't know how old Mr. Sanders is, but 30 years is a long time.
And make it.
And why spend the resources on that?
Right. And we've made that argument. We made that argument in a recent case up in Yavapai. My defendant was, I believe he was 70 years old. We took the life expectancy of him, given his health conditions. We also took a study that determined that your time in prison is essentially weighs more on your body than your time living on the outside. If someone's going to live 10 more years on the outside, they'll probably live 5 in prison, just because of the added stress, the poor health care, the poor food, the lack of energy and the sunshine and whatnot. There's so many factors that feed into what causes someone's health to deteriorate that it was unlikely at best that this person would ever be executed, even if his appeals sailed through on every level.
Well, let me ask this question. Who were the victims in that case?
The victim, it was a man who had killed his wife, and there were 2 children and the wife's family that were still obviously around and missing their loved one. So they would have been the ones that were drugged through the process. And obviously, it might not be obvious to the listeners, but in Arizona, we have a very difficult time communicating with crime victims because of some specific laws protecting our involvement or our communication with them. So they generally don't get our side of the story, or even a chance to ask us questions and have their questions answered by our side. So the communication gap between our side and the victim side was obviously not all but non-existent.
And let me ask this question. What do you think the county attorney would have done if the victim was undocumented and involved in a drug transaction with the accused? Do you think they would be seeking death in that case?
No, I don't.
And what the studies have shown is that death is sought more in cases where there are white victims and victims of means. So if you're poor, if you're a person of color, and you're a victim, chances of the county attorney seeking the death penalty in that case, I think, is less.
And these aren't just playing the race card statements. These are facts and figures that have been well documented and studied over, I don't know how many studies I've read that come up with essentially the same findings.
Yes.
That the death penalty is disproportionately applied based on all of these factors that you just mentioned, unfortunately.
Yes.
With these 37 cases, you're going to have jurisdictions that don't have the resources to handle a capital trial and see it through to the end. Have you heard, or do you know of any ability for the feds to contribute to the states to push these death penalty cases forward in these 37 cases?
I don't know specifically, but I think that executive order that was issued on January 20th could be read broadly enough for the feds to somehow contribute to the costs of prosecution. Now, I think there would be litigation that would come about if that were to occur.
You would raise that issue?
Yes, yes, because federal funds cannot be used for state prosecutions. I mean, we faced that when I was at the Federal Defender's Office. We were representing someone in federal court. There were issues that needed to go back to state court to be raised there before the federal court could consider it. And there were federal judges who said, no, federal defender, you cannot go back to state court because federal funds cannot be used to support state court litigation. Now, there have been exceptions to that rule, but I would expect there to be litigation if the administration suddenly dangled money out to the states to prosecute these cases.
Okay. And these are folks that have arguably no opportunity whatsoever of ever leaving prison. And so I would believe that the residents of these counties and districts where these cases could be relitigated would be upset to know that their tax dollars, instead of going to roads and schools and hospitals and whatnot, are going to rehash 20 and 30-year-old cases that some politician wants to use as a campaign slogan.
No, and that's true. In the richer counties, for instance, Maricopa County, money is no object when it comes to prosecuting these cases. And I think when it comes to the death penalty, you have prosecutors out there who say spare no expense. But to your point, do you want a new swimming pool, a new fire truck? Do you want the roads to be repaired, or do you want to spend the money on prosecuting this guy? And he will likely die before he is ever eligible for execution.
Right. And I know I keep harping on this, but they're pulling people out of a hole in Colorado to throw $10 million at them and put them back in. To me, that sounds egregious or very egregious to misuse the public's funds like that.
We're living in different times.
We are. And I want to talk to you a little bit about the resources that are associated with these cases. There have been many different studies in Kansas and Maryland, Nevada. I know California had done a big one back in 2011 that I believe determined that they had spent upwards of $4 billion on their capital punishment system, and that had achieved 13 executions. So dividing that out, that the total cost per inmate executed is about $308 million. So as you and I both know, the cost of incarceration is well below that. The last figures, I know when we I used to do a lot more of the lower level federal crimes, we'd always get an analysis from the Bureau of Prisons with every pre-sentence report, I think it was, talking about the monthly cost to incarcerate an inmate, and they would adjust it from some federal office that would carry that figure. But depending on whose study you look at, the cost of incarceration alone is about doubled for the special requirements that death row needs. They are also saddled with all of the litigation costs for ongoing cases and the appeals that are much more complex. And so each one of these cases that gets drugged back into court to reattempt the death penalty, we're talking about adding on tens of millions or billions of dollars in fees to relitigate these old cases. If these numbers don't lie, life in prison is a fraction of the cost to carrying out an execution. Have you seen that in your experience?
Without a doubt. All the studies indicate that. In Maricopa County, we have 3 public defense offices that handle death penalty cases, plus there are private lawyers that are assigned to those cases, and that all costs money. You have a capital habeas unit at the Federal Defender's Office that I think last time I looked, their budget was the capital habeas unit budget was $10 million a year. So we're sinking all this money into a system, and what are the results? A couple of executions. We know that at the trial level, there are fewer death sentences that are being imposed. I think the death penalty is on the way out. So it's extremely ineffective when it comes to the costs.
And I want to look at that, because a lot of what we end up litigating, at least on the final stages, are the Eighth Amendment concerns, cruel and unusual punishment. Various states have used all sorts of methods, from lethal injection to, I don't know if anyone's using the electric here anymore, nitrogen gas, and now we're seeing the return of the firing squad in a couple of states. Most countries will refuse to sell or export drugs that could be used for executions to the United States, because in their specific country, they have a ban on capital punishment and they don't want to contribute to that elsewhere. And in college, I studied international trade, and the export documentation and the end user documentation was always a very key part of the movement of goods from one area to another. And there have been these stories that I've heard about the states using some pretty nefarious or shady ways of getting these drugs. Even one that I had heard, and I don't know if it's rumor or not, about them being smuggled in through a dry cleaner. And I don't know if you can confirm or deny some of those stories, or if you've heard of drugs coming in through these alternative paths, I guess you could say.
Well, I can tell you that here in Arizona back in 2010, the Department of Corrections was bringing in sodium thiopenthal in violation of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act through a company called Dream Pharma in the United Kingdom. And Dream Pharma basically had a desk in the back of a driving school on the west end of London. So no one knows where Dream Pharma got the drugs. And the Department of Corrections hired an importer. They reached out to the FDA to try and smooth it through. And people at the local level were helping them. But when FDA National heard of this, there was concern. And of course, we filed a lawsuit. And in the end, a federal judge issued an injunction, a permanent injunction, saying that the Food and Drug Administration may not import or allow drugs, sodium thiopenthal in particular, to be imported for executions. So you have a federal court order. I think this came out in 2013. What does the Department of Corrections do in 2015? It tries to import the same drug, this time through India. And when the drug reached the border in Houston, it was stopped at the border. So I think departments of corrections are trying to get more inventive and creative as to where they get these drugs and how they get these drugs. And what I would say is that, departments of corrections across the country are breaking the law in an effort to enforce the law. And that's simply not right.
And that's what has been confusing to me, because you've got state actors or agents of the state that are essentially smuggling or committing some sort of fraud on some level to obtain this drug and bring it into the country. Why are we not seeing any investigations and prosecutions of these illegal acts? Is it because they're committed by government employees and the argument is the ends justify the means?
If a Department of Corrections is illegally importing the drugs, do you think the Attorney General who represents the Department of Corrections or a local county prosecutor or a federal prosecutor is going to bring charges? That's not going to happen. And what we have seen over time is more and more secrecy surrounding the process, so that the states could get away with these actions.
And you bring up the early 2013 and 2014 at time. I wanted to touch on the victim impact, because I feel like that is primarily spoken of in context of the initial crime. You've got a family member who's been murdered or killed in a violent crime, and that family has been obviously horribly impacted by the acts of this defendant. So that's when people think of the impact of the victim, I think that they usually leave it at that. But as our audience may not know, at the end of a trial, when a sentence is about to be delivered and the prosecutors have won a conviction, the victim gets to make what's known as a victim impact statement. And these statements are generally very emotional explanations about how the crime has affected them, how they missed their loved one. However, these crime victims continue to suffer for years after. I mentioned Julie Hall earlier. I was over at CCA in 2014. That's the federal detention center in Florence. And another attorney had told me that, Joseph Wood's execution was about to take place. And I knew that, Julie was his attorney at one point. So I went over there to be with her and see what, support we could give. And didn't end up watching the execution, but was in the media room. And the victims came out and spoke after that. And this was a execution in 2014. The crime happened in 1989, so there'd been a 25-year gap between the loss of their loved ones and this execution. And it was a horrible crime. And Woods, this became a hot button execution because he lied on the table, kind of gasping for air for 2 hours, and it was considered a botched execution. I know Julie was on the phone to the federal judge trying to get a stay because it was carrying on so long. And then the family of the victims came out and spoke to the media room, and I was genuinely surprised to hear them speak after Woods had been executed, because what I interpreted was not a sigh of relief or, finally this is over. It seemed to me like the crime had just happened. Like what these victims were reliving was the 1989 death of their loved one, not the peaceful conclusion and justice being served 25 years later. I know you've worked with capital cases that have gone through execution, and I'm sure you've had many of these experiences of being in the chamber or being around the victims at the time of execution. Do you feel like these victims, once they see their defendant executed, do they feel a sense of justice and finality or relief, or does this help in their healing?
I just want to say before I answer that I witnessed the Joe Wood execution, and it was anything but peaceful. But to your point, I think that I respect the feelings that victim family members have. They each have their own truth, but I think what we see with the death penalty, because these cases go on for so long, at each step of the way, the victim family members are re-traumatized. The Arizona Supreme Court issues an opinion upholding the conviction and death sentence. There's a report in the media about that. The victim advocate at the Attorney General's office calls to let the family know that occurred. And they're reliving this, and they're reliving it, through the execution. I think some family members may feel a sense of relief after an execution. Others may be sort of like, well, I don't feel better. the person's been executed, but it still hasn't brought my loved one back. And I think that, if we had life without parole as the alternative to the death penalty, that victim family members would be traumatized less and be able to grieve as they need to grieve without having to do it, publicly, through the media or through an execution.
And I think you're spot on. I've felt that the ability for a crime victim's family to heal, and they're never going to be the same, and nothing's going to turn back the hands of time and bring their loved one back. But in their opportunity to move forward, at least, is significantly hindered when there is ongoing litigation that they're being notified about, because they're being notified of all the court hearings and all of the different stages of appeal from their victims' advocates. And so it doesn't allow for them to have a time to focus on themselves and their own healing and their own processing of what terrible experience they've gone through, because it goes on for 15, 20, 30 years. And, unfortunately in Arizona, we're not able to have those conversations with crime victims. So I'm hoping that crime victims see this and can understand that, we as a defense community want their healing as well. It's, our goals don't always end with just winning a case. Sometimes that win, sometimes that resolution for the interests of our client and for the interests of the victims is life without parole. And that allows for a crime victim to forget this, or they're never going to forget, but move past the trauma and not have to continue to confront their offender every time their case is up for another level of appeal. That's
a really good observation. And, because of the limitations on the defense being able to talk to victim family members, I think there's a real missed opportunity. There are some victim family members who would like to talk to the person who committed the murder. We had one case where we had a mediation, and sometimes family members want to know, what were my loved one's last words? Did he suffer? They may want to see remorse, genuine remorse from the person who took their loved one, and that's not available. And you mentioned the Joe Wood case. We sent a letter to the Attorney General's office offering to meet with the victim's family, and that letter went unanswered. I don't know whether the Attorney General asked the family and the family said no, or the Attorney General did not pass it on. But Mr. Wood really wanted to express his remorse. And, was that going to change the outcome? No. But as you saw, those victims were still very angry. And just maybe if they had a chance to talk to Joe Wood, a week or two before his scheduled execution, maybe some of that would have been let go.
Yeah. We always send off requests in Arizona to talk to the victims and victim families and whatnot. I can only think of one time when that letter or that request was granted. And there's a prosecutor at the county attorney's office that I've always really respected, Ryan Green. And, I had asked to speak with the wife of a gentleman that my client had shot and killed. And it about threw me off my chair when I got the email that said that she had agreed to meet and set a time at the county attorney's office for me to go and interview her. And I called my now wife and I said, "What? I don't know what to say to this lady. I've never had someone say yes." And we really talked about how this interview was going to be so much different than any other interview that we had done, because we were talking to someone who, whose life partner, whose husband had been killed almost right in front of her. And I feel like that discussion that we had at the county attorney's office, I went and interviewed her, and the first thing I asked is, why she was willing to have the conversation. And she seemed to really want to understand why it was important for us to talk to her, and what our information could do to assist in her healing. And that's an experience that I've always remembered and have always wanted to repeat with other victim families, because I think if we do open the lines of communication between the defense and the prosecution, and between the victim's family and the defendant or the defendant's family, people can see the humanity on both sides and come to a resolution that's more holistic and not so clinical and harsh and causing such ongoing trauma to both sides.
Yeah, and to that point, I think, what also may be missing from the discussion is, how long is the case going to go on? Mm-hmm. Do victims expect after the trial and the first appeal that the execution is going to go forward? And what I have seen work in some instances is in open court, having someone come in and talk about the appellate process, not only to the family members of the accused, but to the victim's family as well. And I know that there was a time when Judges Keppel and Reinstein were meeting with victims' families to talk about how long the process is going on, so that the victims' family members could have all of that information. Mm-hmm. So I do think that having obviously a respectful dialogue, assuming that the family members want it, can provide more information and hopefully resolve these cases, so that the trauma, so there's not the re-traumatization as a death penalty case moves forward.
Mm-hmm. Dale, to wrap up this discussion, I'd like I know that you're very involved with the policy side of this, the death penalty community. What is it that you think or feel is a change that could be made in our death penalty mechanism in Arizona to offer a more holistic resolution to crime victims than the death penalty?
I think having a discussion like we had today, what's sometimes frustrating is how the prosecutors will sort of stake claim to the victim family members, mm-hmm. and sort of represent their interest. I know there are some organizations out there that represent victim family members, and I think having a full discussion, among prosecutors, defense lawyers, victim advocates, would be a positive thing.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. Very much so. I've always felt like the open communication path would be beneficial to all parties involved. The prosecutors that I have a good relationship with, I feel like our cases run a lot more smoothly, and that we're able to discuss openly with them what a positive outcome for the case is for all involved, and not just our side, not just their side. But if we don't have that open line of communication, we can't do that.
Well, and remember, the prosecutor is there to do justice, not to win.
Right. Exactly. Well, Dale, I really appreciate you coming in today and walking us through all of this. I definitely want to come and audit your class. You're always a wealth of information. So anytime that I can read your material and learn from you, I try and take that opportunity. I think this information is going to really open the eyes of the people that listen to it. So thank you.
Well, thank you for the invitation, Justin. I really enjoyed the discussion, and thanks for doing what you do.
Thank you. At the end of the day, this isn't just about policy or politics. These are real cases and real people, real tax dollars. And the more we understand about how the system actually works, the better. We're going to have better informed conversations and better ways to work through these difficult situations. To our listeners, I'm curious if they learned something today. Maybe you came into this episode with one perspective on the death penalty, and now you're seeing it through a different lens. Whether it's the cost, the timeline, the legal complexities, or just understanding what life actually is like for people on death row, I'd love to know what stood out for you. So please comment on our pages, our social media, and let's keep the conversation going. So thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in to Truth Be Found. The hunt for answers never stops, and neither do we. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us online to stay in the loop. Remember, truth has a way of coming to light. Until next time, keep your head up and your eyes sharp.